There is a moment that appears quietly in human relationships, a moment that begins not with love, not even with attraction, but with curiosity. It often starts as a simple question inside the mind. What would it feel like to be close to this person? At first, the thought seems harmless. It may appear during an ordinary conversation, during a brief moment of eye contact, during a passing interaction that feels slightly more intense than expected. Nothing dramatic happens in that moment. No confession, no physical expression, just a subtle shift in awareness. Suddenly, the other person begins occupying a small corner of the mind, and from that moment forward, curiosity begins its quiet work. The mind starts observing them more carefully, their gestures, their tone of voice, the way they look when they are thinking, the way they react during moments of emotional tension. At first, this attention feels natural, even innocent. After all, curiosity is one of the most basic forces driving human behavior. Curiosity is what pushes us to explore the world, to learn about people, to understand what lies beneath the surface of others. But something interesting happens when curiosity begins mixing with attraction, because attraction introduces a powerful emotional ingredient into the mind: possibility. The mind begins imagining experiences that have not yet happened. And imagination has a remarkable ability to transform curiosity into something far more intense. Because once the mind begins imagining closeness, intimacy, or emotional connection with another person, curiosity stops being passive. It becomes emotionally charged. And emotional curiosity behaves very differently from ordinary curiosity. Ordinary curiosity eventually fades once the answer is discovered. But emotional curiosity often grows stronger the more it remains unanswered. The mind becomes fascinated not just with the person, but with the mystery surrounding them. And this is where something subtle but powerful begins forming, because curiosity does not simply ask questions. Curiosity creates anticipation. And anticipation is one of the most powerful psychological experiences the human brain can generate. The brain begins releasing dopamine not when the experience happens, but when the possibility of the experience appears, which means the mind begins associating the other person with emotional excitement long before anything physical or romantic actually occurs. And slowly, without either person necessarily realizing it, curiosity begins turning into something deeper, something more consuming. Because once curiosity becomes emotionally charged with anticipation, imagination, and attraction, it can begin transforming into obsession. But to understand why this transformation happens, we need to look deeper into how the human brain processes desire. Because desire is not simply about what we want. Desire is about what we cannot stop thinking about. And the moment curiosity begins triggering the brain's reward system, attention begins focusing repeatedly on the same person. The mind begins returning to them during quiet moments of the day, during routine activities, even during completely unrelated conversations. Not because the person is necessarily perfect, but because the brain has associated them with a powerful psychological stimulus: mystery, and the human mind has always been drawn toward mystery. Sexual curiosity is not only about physical attraction. It is about the psychological tension created when the mind senses a possibility that has not yet been explored. The brain naturally seeks patterns and answers. Whenever something remains partially understood, attention stays focused on it. Imagine reading a story that suddenly stops in the middle of a crucial moment. The mind becomes restless because unfinished experiences create psychological tension. The brain wants closure. Sexual curiosity operates in a very similar way. When two people sense attraction but the experience remains incomplete, the mind begins forming what psychologists sometimes call a curiosity loop. A curiosity loop occurs when the brain repeatedly returns to the same unanswered emotional question. Does this person feel the same attraction? What would happen if the connection moved further? What would the experience actually feel like? Because these questions remain unanswered, the mind continues revisiting them. Each time the brain returns to these questions, it activates imagination. And imagination strengthens emotional investment. The person begins occupying more mental space, more emotional attention, more psychological energy, and over time, the curiosity loop becomes self-reinforcing. Because every moment of attention strengthens the emotional association between curiosity and the person who triggered it. This is how curiosity begins transforming into something more powerful. The mind becomes increasingly interested in discovering the answer to the emotional mystery. And the more mysterious the connection feels, the stronger the curiosity becomes. Another powerful factor behind sexual curiosity is how the brain responds to anticipation. Many people assume that pleasure occurs when an experience finally happens. But neuroscience shows something surprising. The brain releases dopamine most intensely before the experience occurs. Dopamine is not simply the chemical of pleasure. It is the chemical of anticipation and pursuit. When the brain believes something exciting might happen soon, dopamine begins rising. And that rise motivates attention, focus, emotional investment, which means the brain becomes energized by the possibility itself. In the context of sexual curiosity, this effect can become extremely powerful, because the anticipation surrounding the interaction with another person often feels more stimulating than the reality that might eventually follow. The brain becomes fascinated with the possibility of intimacy, with the potential emotional connection, with the tension that exists in the moments before anything is expressed. And as dopamine continues reinforcing the anticipation, the mind begins returning to the same person repeatedly. Not because the person necessarily demanded attention, but because the brain has linked them with emotional reward, which gradually transforms curiosity into psychological attachment. Mystery also plays an important role in sexual curiosity. The human mind is naturally drawn toward experiences that remain partially unknown. When people reveal everything about themselves immediately, curiosity fades quickly. But when a person remains slightly unpredictable, when their intentions remain somewhat unclear, when their emotional signals appear subtle rather than obvious, the mind becomes intrigued. This intrigue keeps attention active, and the longer curiosity remains active, the more emotional energy accumulates around the connection. Because the brain continues attempting to solve the mystery, every interaction becomes a potential clue. Every moment of eye contact becomes something the mind analyzes afterward. Every conversation becomes an event the brain replays later in search of hidden meaning. And slowly, curiosity stops being a temporary emotional reaction. It becomes a psychological pattern. A pattern where the brain begins linking emotional excitement with the presence of a specific person. And once that pattern forms, something deeper begins developing. The connection stops feeling like simple curiosity. It begins feeling personal, meaningful, even emotionally necessary. And this is the point where curiosity can begin crossing the line into obsession. Because once curiosity begins repeating itself inside the mind, something deeper begins forming beneath awareness. A pattern of emotional reinforcement. The human brain learns through repetition. Every time a thought appears and produces emotional stimulation, the brain quietly marks that experience as something worth revisiting. And sexual curiosity often carries exactly this type of stimulation. A mixture of imagination, attraction, tension, and anticipation. Each time the mind drifts toward thoughts about the other person, it receives a small emotional reward. A brief sense of excitement, a subtle rise in dopamine, a momentary feeling of emotional intensity. And because the brain enjoys this stimulation, it begins repeating the process. At first, these thoughts may appear only occasionally, perhaps during quiet moments of the day, during a pause between conversations, during a walk home when the mind begins replaying recent interactions. But gradually the frequency increases. The mind begins returning to the same person more often, not intentionally, but automatically, because the brain has learned that thinking about them produces emotional stimulation. And this is where curiosity begins shifting into something stronger, something more persistent, because when a thought becomes emotionally rewarding, it slowly transforms into a mental habit. The brain begins creating what psychologists sometimes call an attention loop. An attention loop occurs when the mind repeatedly returns to the same stimulus because it has become associated with emotional reward. And once an attention loop forms around a person, their presence begins expanding beyond real-world interactions. They begin appearing inside the imagination, inside memories, inside hypothetical scenarios the mind constructs when reality offers no immediate interaction. And imagination has a remarkable ability to intensify emotional experiences, because imagination removes the limitations of reality. Inside imagination, the interaction can unfold perfectly. There are no awkward moments, no misunderstandings, no interruptions, only the emotional possibility of connection. And because the brain cannot always clearly distinguish between vividly imagined experiences and real emotional stimulation, these imagined scenarios can strengthen the psychological connection even further. This is why sexual curiosity often begins expanding into deeper mental territory. The person is no longer simply someone encountered occasionally. They become a recurring figure inside the mind's emotional landscape, a character in the brain's internal narrative. And once someone enters that internal narrative, something powerful begins happening. The mind starts building meaning around them, because the human brain is naturally drawn to stories. We constantly construct narratives to make sense of our experiences. And when curiosity remains unresolved, the brain begins filling the gaps with imagined explanations. Perhaps there is something special about this connection. Perhaps the tension between us means something deeper. Perhaps the attraction exists because we are meant to meet. These interpretations may not always be accurate, but they feel emotionally convincing because the mind is attempting to explain the intensity of the curiosity it continues experiencing. And the more the brain invests in this narrative, the more significant the person begins to feel. They become more than someone interesting. They become someone psychologically important. And this is the moment when curiosity crosses a subtle boundary. Because once the mind assigns emotional importance to someone, attention becomes even more focused. The brain begins monitoring them more carefully. Their words begin carrying greater emotional weight. Their reactions begin influencing mood. Their presence begins creating emotional shifts. A brief conversation can suddenly brighten the entire day. A moment of distance can produce unexpected disappointment. And gradually, the emotional state of the person experiencing curiosity begins responding to the presence or absence of the other person. This is a sign that the curiosity loop has evolved into something deeper, a form of emotional dependency, not necessarily conscious, but psychological, because the brain has linked emotional stimulation with the presence of a particular person, which means their existence inside the environment begins influencing the emotional state of the individual experiencing curiosity. And when emotional states begin depending on another person's presence, curiosity slowly transforms into obsession. But obsession does not appear suddenly. It develops gradually, quietly, almost invisibly, because the mind rarely recognizes the shift while it is happening. From the inside, it simply feels like fascination, like a connection that feels unusually compelling, like an attraction that seems difficult to explain logically. But beneath that fascination, deeper psychological forces are quietly strengthening the bond. Forces related to anticipation, reward, tension, and emotional meaning. Each of these elements contributes to the same psychological outcome. The person becomes increasingly difficult to remove from the mind. Thoughts about them appear spontaneously. Memories of small interactions replay repeatedly. Imagined future moments begin occupying mental space. And as this process continues, the emotional intensity surrounding the connection grows stronger. Not because something dramatic necessarily happened between the two individuals, but because the mind has invested so much attention and imagination into the possibility of the connection. And attention is one of the most powerful forces shaping human desire. Whatever we repeatedly focus on begins feeling more emotionally significant, more meaningful, more real, which is why sexual curiosity can sometimes evolve into obsession even before a relationship ever fully begins. because obsession is not created by physical closeness alone. It is created by mental attention. And once attention becomes deeply focused on someone, the brain begins treating them as emotionally important, which naturally strengthens the attachment. Yet the most fascinating part of this process is that the person experiencing the obsession often believes the intensity must come from the connection itself. They assume the other person must possess something uniquely powerful, something that explains why the attraction feels so consuming. But often the deeper explanation lies inside the mind itself. Inside the psychological loops created by curiosity, anticipation, imagination, and emotional reinforcement. And the more these loops repeat, the stronger the attachment becomes, until curiosity has completely transformed into obsession. Because when curiosity has repeated itself long enough, something even more powerful begins taking control of the mind. Expectation. Expectation is one of the most underestimated psychological forces shaping human desire. When the brain repeatedly imagines a particular emotional experience, it slowly begins preparing itself for that experience as if it might eventually happen. And once the brain begins expecting something emotionally rewarding, it becomes increasingly focused on achieving it. In the beginning, sexual curiosity simply creates questions. But over time, curiosity begins evolving into anticipation. The mind begins imagining what the connection could become. Moments of closeness, physical tension, the emotional electricity that exists between two people who feel something unspoken but deeply present. And the more vividly the brain imagines these experiences, the more real they begin to feel internally. Because imagination does not simply create pictures. It activates emotional responses. Heart rate may increase slightly. Attention becomes sharper. The brain begins treating the imagined scenario almost as if it were a real possibility unfolding in the present. And this is where the psychological transformation truly begins. Because once expectation forms inside the mind, curiosity stops being passive. It becomes active pursuit. The mind begins looking for opportunities. Small interactions suddenly feel significant. A casual message becomes emotionally meaningful. A brief glance becomes a signal worth interpreting. Every detail becomes evidence the brain tries to analyze. Does this person feel the same tension? Do they sense the curiosity too? Are they thinking about me the same way I am thinking about them? These questions deepen the psychological loop, because each question invites another imagined answer. And each imagined answer strengthens the emotional presence of the other person inside the mind. But there is another layer beneath this process. A biological layer connected directly to the brain's reward system, because obsession is rarely only emotional. It is often neurological. Each time the brain imagines the possibility of intimacy or closeness, dopamine begins rising again. But dopamine does not simply create pleasure. Dopamine motivates pursuit. It encourages the brain to seek the experience it believes might produce reward, which means the brain slowly begins associating the other person with emotional stimulation. Not just attraction, but anticipation. And anticipation can become addictive. because anticipation keeps the mind suspended in a state of emotional tension. The experience has not happened yet, but it feels close enough that the brain continues imagining it. And this suspended state between possibility and fulfillment creates a powerful psychological magnet. The mind keeps returning to the same person again and again, not because the relationship necessarily exists, but because the possibility of the relationship continues activating the reward system. And the more often this happens, the deeper the obsession becomes. Thoughts begin appearing more frequently. The person becomes part of daily mental life. They appear in idle moments, during routine tasks, even during conversations with other people, because the brain has categorized them as emotionally important. And once someone occupies that level of importance inside the mind, removing them becomes extremely difficult. This is why sexual curiosity can sometimes feel overwhelming, because it is not only about attraction. It is about the brain becoming emotionally invested in the possibility of an experience that has not yet occurred. A possibility the mind keeps replaying and expanding through imagination. But here lies the deeper truth about obsession. Obsession often reveals more about the mind experiencing it than about the person who triggered it, because the intensity does not come solely from the other person. It comes from the psychological processes unfolding inside the observer. Curiosity, anticipation, imagination, tension, expectation. All of these forces combine to create a powerful emotional loop. A loop where the brain keeps reinforcing the importance of the connection. And the longer this loop continues, the stronger the emotional attachment becomes, until the person begins feeling almost impossible to ignore. But understanding this process changes something important. It reveals that obsession is not always evidence of destiny. Sometimes it is evidence of attention. The human mind becomes deeply attached to whatever it repeatedly focuses on, because attention shapes emotional significance. Whatever occupies the mind most often gradually begins feeling most meaningful. And this explains why sexual curiosity can evolve into deep obsession. Not because the connection was always meant to become overwhelming, but because the mind kept feeding it energy, thought after thought, imagination after imagination, until the possibility itself became emotionally powerful. Yet once we understand these hidden psychological patterns, something interesting happens. The mystery surrounding obsession begins to fade, not because the experience becomes less intense, but because we begin seeing the deeper forces shaping it. Forces rooted in how the brain responds to curiosity, anticipation, and emotional uncertainty, which reminds us of something profound about human desire. Sometimes the strongest emotional experiences are not created by what we actually possess. They are created by what we continue imagining, because imagination is where curiosity grows, and curiosity is where obsession begins. And perhaps the most fascinating part of human psychology is this: the mind is not always obsessed with people. Sometimes it is obsessed with the possibility of them. If this exploration helped you understand something new about the psychology of attraction and obsession, subscribe to Voxlore Audio, because the deeper we explore the hidden patterns of human behavior, the more clearly we begin seeing the invisible forces shaping desire, relationships, and the mind itself.